So next in your notes deals with a section entitled Soil Acidity or Sources of Soil Acidity. And even before I start this, let me talk about sources of basicity or alkalinity. Most of the primary mineral phases found in soils are alkaline, right? They're calcium carbonates or calcium chlorides or potassium chlorides or carbonates of other elements or mineral phases, and they tend to be alkaline in nature. And so when you have a very young soil, young soils typically have a high pH in general. And due to natural or anthropogenic weathering, or weathering due to natural or unnatural events, acidity is generated. And there's sources of acidity all around us, which drive acidity in soils themselves. So in your notes, there's 7 sources of acidity. So let's talk about those. The first one is rainfall. Very simple. Rainfall, when it comes in contact with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, becomes acidic. The precipitation becomes acidic. And here's the reaction that occurs. Where carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reacts with precipitation or rain from the atmosphere or moisture in the atmosphere to form, and I skipped a step here, but it forms something called carbonic acid, H2CO3. Now, carbonic acid is a weak acid. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that is it doesn't dissociate or break apart readily, but it can break apart to some extent. And when it does, it forms bicarbonate and a free hydrogen ion. And we learned in the previous video that the more free hydrogen ions you have, the more acidity or more acid you have. So go back to that table that I shared with you in the previous video that looks just like this, and you'll see that the more free hydrogen, oh, this is really hard to see, but the more free hydrogen ions you have as you go up on this column, the lower the pH. That's exactly what happens with rainfall. Natural rainfall doesn't have a pH of 7. It's typically somewhere between 5.5 and 5.7. It does vary across the US depending on where you're located. So here's a precipitation map and a pH map overlaid on top of one another across the US. And you'll notice, depends on which figure you're looking at, but pH values can be greater than 5.3, 5.1 to 5.3, 4.5 to 4.7. In fact, if you look at some of these areas like where we are here in Ohio, pH values are 4.4 to 4.7. In the Western US, sometimes you have 6.2s, closer to 6s, 5.8. And some of this is driven, especially the lower pH values in the atmosphere, are driven by emissions. So sulfur dioxide emissions, ammonia emissions, nitrous oxide emissions. And so some of these, like NOx's, come from the back ends of our cars. There's certainly more people along the East Coast. There's certainly more precipitation in this area of the United States, as say out here in Utah and Nevada, and there's less people and there's less cars, et cetera. So if we look at one of the, this is an anthropogenic source of acidity in the form of sulfur dioxide. Now, we've done a really good job of removing sulfur dioxide from emissions, say from coal-fired smokestacks, for example. But this is what's occurred in the past, where sulfur dioxide reacts with oxygen plus water, and it forms sulfate and 2 free hydrogen ions. That's the source of acidity. And in fact, if you combine 2 hydrogens plus 1 sulfate molecule, do you know what this term is? This term is sulfuric acid. It's sulfuric acid that's generated during this reaction. And that likely has driven some of these pH values down in the past. Currently, most of these pH values are more likely an effect due to nitrous oxide emissions from cars, which generates nitric acid. The second portion or form of acidity that we find in soils is due simply to weathering. And this is the leaching of basic cations from the upper portions of the soil profiles, as well as the potential of soils to form from acidic parent materials like granites or sandstones or shales, which all can generate acidity. specifically granites. Okay. But the general theme is this, that soils become more acidic due to leaching of basic cations from the upper soil profiles. So where do you see acidic soils in the United States? You see them basically east of the Mississippi, and you typically find alkaline soils west of the Mississippi. And that's a huge generalization, but it's a good rule of thumb. So here are some pictures. And this is a picture of a soil pH map across the United States. And it supports what I just stated, that on the eastern portions of the United States, in general, east of the Mississippi, in general, the soils are acidic. Our soils are acidic. And if you're west of the Mississippi, by and large, the soils are alkaline or basic. And again, this is a broad picture, and it doesn't tell you the whole story, and it doesn't tell you the fact that there are pockets of acidity in areas that are alkaline due to anthropogenic manipulation of soils. So let's look at another picture. I like this picture because years ago I had some students from, actually they were from France in my class, and so I found this picture. It tells you a similar story. It tells you where soils are alkaline or neutral, which tends to be most of Europe. And as you get into some of these higher weathering regimes, the soils, I'm sorry, they're mostly acidic. I'm backwards. They're mostly acidic. And because of the weathering scheme. And when you get into these Mediterranean or drier climates, the soils become more acidic and they become more alkaline because they haven't been weathered. In fact, if you look at Asia as a whole, most of Asia, at least in the central portion that's acidic, is alkaline. Okay. And then if you go into like Southeast Asia, where you have lots of precipitation occurring, or along the coast of China and Japan, etc., these soils are acidic because of weathering. And I like showing this. First of all, I like Hawaii, and this is my happy place. And I like the fact that in Hawaii, in such a small area, you see drastic changes in pH. And so you can have acidic to alkaline within 50 miles of one another, which makes studying soils in the Hawaiian chain very exciting as a soil scientist. The third portion that generates acidity for soils is respiration by roots, excuse me, and respiration by microorganisms. What this does is it increases, it says the partial pressure of CO2. It increases respiration by roots and microorganisms increases the amount of carbon dioxide in the soil. And just like in the atmosphere, there's the presence of water, and the reaction is driven to the right that forms carbonic acid, which can dissociate to form bicarbonate and a free hydrogen ion, which is the source of acidity. Okay, this is natural. This happens all the time. It's happened all the time on the, well, almost all the time on the face of the earth. The fourth source of acidity is the fact that plant roots can exude free hydrogen ions into the soil solution to help, among other things, maintain electroneutrality when taking up cations, right? And so this is active transport where free hydrogens are pumped across the plasma membrane out into the rhizosphere or the soil surrounding the root in exchange for uptaking, say, calcium or other cations like potassium. And it generates acidity in the rhizosphere. A fifth means by which soils become acidic is simply organic matter decomposition. And when organic matter decomposes, that can release organic acids into the soil itself and create acidity. Okay. These organic acids might have carboxylate groups with free hydrogen ions that can be stripped off of the carboxylate group to generate acidity or free hydrogen ion. It can have alcohol group or OH group that can be stripped of hydrogen to create acidity in the soil. The sixth source of acidity is the hydrolysis of aluminum and iron reactions, or aluminum and iron hydrolysis reactions with water. All right. So hydrolysis simply means the splitting of water. So this can occur. All right. So if you have free aluminum in the soil, which we can do, or we can have, it can react with water to form aluminum hydroxide plus a free hydrogen ion. And that aluminum hydroxide can react with water to form another aluminum hydroxide plus another free hydrogen. And that aluminum hydroxide can react with water to form this, which is a mineral called gibbsite, which is a mineral precipitate. These other two forms are just simply in the soil solution. But this overall reaction of aluminum reacting with water in the soil to form this mineral, if you add these three reactions together, this is the overall reaction. Aluminum reacts with three waters to form aluminum hydroxide, which is called gibbsite. You don't need to know that. And it forms three free hydrogen ions. So it generates acidity. The same reactions occur with iron. Iron as a +3 ion undergoes the exact same three reactions, and the overall reaction would be iron +3 reacts with three waters to form iron hydroxide, which is known as goethite. It's an iron hydroxide mineral, which is stable, and three free hydrogen ions. That is the source of acidity. Okay. So aluminum toxicity to plants. What happens? Aluminum gets kicked off exchange sites. So sites like the edges of clay particles where, and you're going to learn about this in the next unit. You probably learned about this in your introductory soil science class at one point in time, that clay minerals are negatively charged and they can attract positive charges or positive ions like aluminum, which is +3. When aluminum gets kicked off an exchange site, it can react with water in the soil solution to form aluminum hydroxide and release three free hydrogen ions. And this acid generation is toxic to roots. As the pH decreases, aluminum minerals tend to dissolve. And when that occurs, that increases the aluminum concentrations in the soil solution that can also be toxic to plants. Okay, and so that's shown in this figure here. All right, so pH on the x-axis, and this is aluminum concentration in millimolar on the y-axis. And at low concentrations, aluminum availability in the form of free aluminum increases as pH decreases. That's what this graph is showing you. The same thing holds true for iron species in soils as well. Now, the seventh and the last form of acidity in soils is from the use of ammonium-based fertilizers. It says ammoniacal fertilizers or ammonium-based fertilizers. When we as humans utilize ammonium-based fertilizers, this is any form of a fertilizer that either starts as ammonium or can create ammonia, NH4. NH4 in soil can react with oxygen to form nitrate. Okay, and we're going to talk about this in the next in unit 5. But it can form nitrate plus water plus two free hydrogen ions. And if you actually add ammonium-based fertilizers at either excessive rates or at low rates, but over long periods of time, you can generate enough acidity to drive pH values down from, 8 to 5.5. So ammonium containing or producing fertilizers are certainly a major source of acidity in ag soils. And this is a figure from the textbook that's not required that shows you this was an ammonium-based fertilizer that was applied at increasing application rates in terms of kilograms per hectare. And on the x-axis is pH, and on the y-axis is soil depth with respect to each one of these ammonium-based fertilizer applications. So what do you see? You see with the control or nothing added, the pH, at least in the soil surface, stays around 6.5. And as you go down with depth, it decreases to about 6. And this is likely a function of just natural weathering and generation of acidity over time. But as you increase the amount of an ammonium-based fertilizer, the pH in the soil surface certainly and drastically decreases because of the reaction above. And that reaction at great enough ammonium-based fertilizer concentrations or application rates can drive down pH lower in the profile. All right. What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. When you have a soil that has very low pH values, say below 5 to 5.5, deeper than about 10 centimeters or 15 centimeters in the soil, and you plant a seed in this soil, the seed's going to germinate and then it's going to encounter toxicity. And the apical meristem of the root is going to be killed. And then if the root can push out lateral roots, those lateral roots likely will be killed and you won't have anything growing in this particular field. Okay. There's ways to overcome that, certainly, but that's the challenge. So let me throw two or three thinking questions at you. Which one of the following nitrogen fertilizers would have the greatest impact on soil per pound of nitrogen? Okay, would it be ammonium nitrate as a fertilizer, ammonium sulfate as a fertilizer, or sodium nitrate as a fertilizer? Now, what I want you to do is look at the reaction. All three of these fertilizers contain nitrogen, but look at the end products on the other side of the double arrows. On this side, on the right-hand side of the double arrows for ammonium nitrate, these are the reactions, all right? I'm not gonna go through all of them, but the end product is 2 free hydrogen ions. For ammonium sulfate, the end product is 4 free hydrogen ions. And for sodium nitrate, there are no free hydrogen ions. So let me tell you one thing. First, you would be foolish to apply sodium nitrate because plants require sodium, but they don't require, I'm sorry, plants require nitrogen and they can take up nitrate, but they don't require sodium. So why would you apply that? So you could put an X through that one. The other two fertilizers, what you want to look at is the amount of free hydrogen ions that are generated on a per pound basis. And the greatest amount of free hydrogen ions generated is associated with ammonium sulfate fertilizer. So this one applied over time would lower soil pH to a greater extent or quicker than ammonium nitrate. Let me throw another thinking question at you. So why does the surface horizon or the soil surface of a native prairie soil have a lower pH than the underlying horizons? Now, you can apply what you just learned in this portion of this video to answer this question. If you go back into your notes that you just took on sources of acidity, you'll note that there's certainly increased respiration, likely from microbial activity and root activity. And if this is a native prairie, a lot of the roots tend to be close to the soil surface or in the soil horizon. And so that likely has led to CO2 increases in the soil, reacting with water to form carbonic acid, which is a weak acid, but it does dissociate and form free hydrogen ions, i.e., generates acidity. Another way in which this surface horizon could become acidic is that plant growth removes basic cations from that horizon in exchange for free hydrogen ions, right? There's this pump. This could be the antiport pump that we talked about in the previous unit. And nitrification of ammonium produced from decomposition occurs, right? So what do I mean by this? What do I mean by this is that organic nitrogen forms when they're decomposed. The first step or one of the first products, we'll talk about this in more detail in the nitrogen unit, but one of the first products is ammonium. And that ammonium can undergo reactions to form free hydrogen ions. We talked about that. And in fact, the fourth point, why a surface horizon in a native prairie might have a lower pH value is because there's simply more weathering and leaching from that soil surface horizon. Let me throw another question at you. Oh, I think this is the last question. Why would a field crop for 20 years have a lower pH than uncropped soil in the fence row? Right. So the fence row means you have a field that's surrounded by a fence. Farmers oftentimes don't plant crops right up against the fence line. That soil is most likely similar to the soil in the field that's been under crops for 20 years. So why is there a difference in pH? Well, could be a number of different reasons. One reason could be the addition of ammonium producing fertilizers that result in nitrification and the generation of free hydrogen ions. Now, there's a couple examples, and I hope to share one or two of these with you through the issue of the week throughout this semester, whereby soils that are typically basic, say in the Western United States, have become acidic because of the use or prolonged use of ammonium-based fertilizers in agroecosystems. Stay tuned.